The forest was alive, dark and restless beneath a sky bruised with dusk. Rosalie Evans surged forward, her chest tight with panic, heart pounding like thunder. Branches clawed at her ivory gown, silk tearing as thorns snatched the lace hem. Each rip echoed like a shriek of defiance against everything she'd fled. Behind her, the barking of dogs grew louder, fierce and hungry, driving terror deep into her bones. Rosalie's breath hitched painfully in her throat, a harsh reminder of her exhaustion. Every muscle protested, but the memory of her fiancé's cruel eyes, the way they stripped her dignity and stole her hope, pushed her forward. She stumbled, catching herself against a rough-barked pine, palms scraped raw, leaving streaks of red behind. Her father's voice rang sharply in her mind, cold and unyielding. "You'll marry Nathaniel Stokes, or you'll live to regret defying me." Regret. She had tasted it already, bitter as blood on her tongue, but she'd never regret choosing freedom, even if it cost her everything. Rosalie shivered, the night air biting through the remnants of her dress, hair tangled and damp, sweat mingling with tears. Ahead, shadows gathered thickly, the unknown stretching endlessly forward. The forest whispered around her, restless murmurs urging her deeper into darkness. A faint rustle came from behind, and Rosalie's heart lurched. They were gaining ground. Adrenaline burned anew, and she sprinted through brambles, ignoring the tearing of her skin. Leaves whipped at her face, and the earthy scent of damp moss filled her lungs, raw and primal. Rosalie's pulse drummed wildly, her entire existence reduced to the frantic rhythm of survival. She broke free of thick foliage and stumbled into a clearing lit dimly by the fading sun. She froze, chest heaving, eyes wide with fear. Standing before her, silhouetted against the sinking golden light, was a towering figure, broad shoulders framed by a plaid flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, forearms powerful and scarred. His eyes, deep-set and shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, locked onto hers in startled curiosity. She staggered backward, instinctively lifting a trembling hand in silent plea. "Please." Her voice was barely more than a whisper, cracked and desperate. "Please help me." The stranger hesitated only a heartbeat before swiftly stepping forward. Without a word, he placed a finger to his lips, signaling silence. Rosalie swallowed hard, heart still thundering painfully against her ribs, uncertain if she just traded one captor for another. Yet something about his quiet authority steadied her trembling limbs. Heavy boots and baying dogs thundered nearer. The man swiftly lifted a tarp from a wagon filled with rough-hewn timber, motioning urgently for her to hide. Rosalie climbed inside, pulling her battered gown close, squeezing beneath the coarse burlap. Pine-scented darkness surrounded her, heart hammering against her chest as footsteps approached. Gruff voices invaded the clearing, loud and angry. "Seen a girl?" a harsh voice demanded, unmistakably Nathaniel's foreman. "She's running from a rightful marriage." "No girl here, friend," came the deep, calm reply from the man who'd concealed her. His voice held a quiet confidence, strong and reassuring. "Just lumber and men tired from honest work." Heavy silence filled the air, broken only by panting dogs circling restlessly. Rosalie's muscles burned, every nerve frayed with tension. "Mind if we take a look?" The pursuer pressed suspiciously. "Do as you like," the stranger drawled, voice edged with casual indifference, even a hint of humor. "Though you'll find nothing but splinters and sweat." Long seconds stretched, Rosalie's breathing shallow, almost non-existent beneath her covering. Finally, footsteps receded, voices fading away with irritated murmurs. Relief surged hot through her veins, leaving her weak with gratitude. The tarp was gently lifted, and moonlight revealed the man's face clearly for the first time. Sharp blue eyes studied her intently beneath a rugged brow. His features were stern yet softened by evident compassion. "You can come out," he murmured kindly, extending a strong, calloused hand. She hesitated only briefly before grasping it, allowing him to help her from the wagon. Once on the ground, Rosalie wobbled unsteadily, legs trembling from exertion and relief. The man caught her arm gently, steadying her. His gaze flickered briefly over her torn dress and bruised hands, and his jaw tightened with quiet anger. "Name's Abel Shaw," he said softly, voice gentle yet commanding respect. "I run this logging camp." "Rosalie Evans," she breathed shakily, offering her name like a precious, fragile secret. I had nowhere else to go. Abel studied her thoughtfully, clearly measuring the weight of her words. Who are those men chasing you? He asked finally, tone cautious yet firm. She trembled, dread coiling tightly within her chest. They work for Nathaniel Stokes, the man my father chose for me. He's violent, ruthless. I refused to marry him, but my father didn't care. Understanding flickered in Abel's eyes, deepening their warmth. No one deserves a fate like that, he said quietly. You're safe here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll decide what comes next. The kindness in his words almost broke her, tears welling in her eyes. Abel discreetly looked away, allowing her to regain composure, respecting her dignity even in this vulnerable state. He gestured quietly toward the camp hidden among the pines. In minutes, Rosalie found herself surrounded by warm lantern light, the scent of pine logs mingling with fresh coffee brewing over an open fire. Lumberjacks eyed her curiously, their faces rugged yet kind, offering gruff nods of greeting. Abel introduced her simply as a distant cousin, his tone brooking no questions. Gratefully, Rosalie felt herself relaxing slightly under his quiet protection. She sat on a stump beside the fire, sipping strong coffee that burned her throat pleasantly, warming the cold ache in her bones. Abel settled nearby, silently sharpening an axe, his rhythmic motions comforting. Glancing at his rugged hands, scarred from labor, Rosalie felt an unexpected flutter deep inside, something gentle stirring within her battered heart. "Why risk helping me?" she asked softly, daring to break their silence. "You could have just turned me away." He paused, axe blade glinting in firelight, gaze far away for a moment before returning to hers. "Lost my family a few years back," he replied quietly, voice roughened by buried pain. "Wife and daughter. Couldn't protect them then. Won't ever turn away someone needing help now." His confession touched her deeply, forging a silent connection between them. Rosalie felt tears prick again, this time not from fear but gratitude. Abel's quiet presence felt strong yet comforting, the wounds of her escape momentarily soothed by his honesty. The camp gradually quieted, lumberjacks retreating to rough-hewn cabins scattered beneath towering pines. Abel showed Rosalie to a small, private shed turned makeshift quarters. It was sparse but comfortable, blankets folded neatly on a cot. "You're safe," he repeated softly at the doorway, his eyes sincere and reassuring. "No harm will come to you here." She believed him. The exhaustion, held desperately at bay, finally overtook her. Rosalie collapsed onto the cot, wrapping herself tightly in woolen blankets, Abel's quiet strength lingering like a shield around her. Yet even as her eyes drifted shut, a whispered doubt crept into her weary heart. Abel's kindness had saved her tonight, but Nathaniel would never stop hunting her. Danger still hung over them both, dark and relentless as the forest itself. But for this moment, safe in the logging camp guarded by a quiet stranger, Rosalie allowed herself to hope. Tomorrow would come with new challenges, but tonight she surrendered to sleep, dreaming of freedom and the haunting kindness of Abel Shaw, a man she scarcely knew, yet who already seemed impossible to forget. The morning came slow, blanketed in a hush that only the deep woods could hold. Rosalie stirred beneath woolen covers, her body aching with bruises and sleep too shallow to heal. A single sunbeam spilled through a crack in the wall, falling across the worn planks of the shed's floor. Pine sap scent lingered on the air, clean and sharp, as if the trees themselves had watched over her in the night. Her fingers brushed the fabric of the dress she still wore, stiff with dried mud and torn silk, the train now frayed beyond repair. A knock sounded gently on the door. 2 taps, then quiet. Rosalie sat upright, breath caught, until the door opened a crack and Abel's voice followed. "Brought you some clothes. Thought you might want a wash, too. We set out water behind the shed." She nodded, her voice still lost beneath sleep and a creeping uncertainty. Abel stepped inside only long enough to place a folded bundle on the wooden stool, then retreated without lingering. Outside, she found a basin filled with warm water, steam curling into the morning air. Next to it lay a bar of rough soap and a square of linen. The clothes were simple, a faded calico blouse, a clean petticoat, and brown cotton skirts well worn by weather and honest work. There was something freeing in the plainness of them, as though shedding her bridal silks gave her a name of her own. She washed quickly, mindful of the camp's presence. The water stung in places where the brambles had torn her skin, but it felt like something old being scrubbed away. When she returned to the shed to dress, she left the ruined wedding gown folded beneath the cot, a token of a life no longer hers. When she stepped out, Abel waited near the cook fire, a tin cup steaming in his hand. He looked up and saw her, clean-faced, hair braided back, the morning sun warming the gold in her eyes. Something unreadable flickered across his face. "Feel better?" he asked, offering her the coffee. "Better than I've felt in weeks," she said, taking the cup and sipping gratefully. "Thank you. For the clothes. And for not asking questions I'm not ready to answer." "You answered enough last night," Abel said simply. "More than most would have had the strength for." A silence settled between them, quiet but not empty. Around the camp, the rhythm of work resumed. Men swung axes in steady arcs, boots thudding over packed dirt, saws singing as they bit into ancient pine. The logging camp moved like a living thing, each part dependent on the others, rough and precise in its choreography. Abel motioned toward a nearby bench beneath a pine. "Come sit. If you're staying a while, there's things you'll want to understand." Rosalie followed, still holding the warm tin in her hands. She sat beside him, her fingers brushing wood smoothed by years of sun and weather. Abel didn't speak right away. Instead, he watched the tree line, where light filtered down like smoke through the high canopy. "You'll hear folks call this the widow's forest," he began. "Superstition, mostly. Some say the trees remember every man that's died swinging an axe beneath them. Others say the pines sing to those left behind." Rosalie listened, her gaze drifting to the tall trunks swaying gently in the breeze. "Do you believe that?" "I believe the woods don't forget. And I believe pain has a way of echoing, if you don't face it square." Her fingers tightened on the tin. "Do you carry an echo too, Abel?" He nodded once. "I do. My daughter was 10 when fever took her. My wife followed not 6 months after. Couldn't bear the hole she left behind. This place, it's where I came to work with my hands and stop the ache from eating me whole." Rosalie turned toward him. "And did it help?" Abel gave a half-smile, more ghost than joy. "Some days. Others, I just learned to live beside the echo." A crow cried somewhere above them, sharp and sudden. Rosalie looked up. "I used to dream about running away. But when I finally did, I felt more lost than ever." "You weren't lost," Abel said, voice low but certain. "You were surviving. There's a difference." She looked at him then, truly looked, at the lines etched deep in his face, the steadiness in his eyes, the man built not just of strength but of scars. The next few days passed in slow, meaningful rhythm. Rosalie stayed close to the camp center, finding solace in small tasks, helping prepare meals, folding linens, even mending the torn shirts of the lumberjacks who returned each evening bruised by their work. She learned their names and, in turn, they learned not to question hers. There was Eli, whose right eye twitched every time he laughed. There was Red, who wasn't red-haired at all but sunburnt and stubborn. And Jules, the quiet one with hands too gentle for felling trees, who carved delicate animals from spare wood. They offered her a kind of respect she had never known, not the formal obedience demanded by status or title, but an earned regard born from silence shared and work done. These men, rough as mountain granite, didn't ask why she'd come or where she belonged. They simply made room. Abel watched her from the edges. Always near, never hovering. When she smiled, he smiled. When she winced at night, remembering nightmares too vividly, he left a lantern lit just outside her door. But shadows moved too. One evening, as the camp sat around the fire, passing a jug of warm cider, a stranger's name broke the stillness. "Heard word from Dry Creek," said Red, voice low. "Nathaniel Stokes has been asking around. Said a bride ran off before the vows. Offering coin for anyone who's seen her." The jug stilled mid-pass. Rosalie's breath froze. Abel's eyes found hers across the flames, and without a word, he stood and doused the fire. In the hush that followed, he spoke. "We don't trade coin for people. Not now. Not ever." No one argued. But the warmth of the evening never quite returned. That night, Rosalie sat alone beneath a tree, the moon filtering down in slivers. Abel joined her quietly, sitting close but not too close. "You don't need to run again," he said. "But if he comes here—" "He won't leave the same," Abel said. "And neither will you." Rosalie's throat tightened. "He'd kill you." Abel met her gaze. "Let him try." She looked away, tears brimming. "I'm not worth that." "You don't get to decide that anymore," he said. "We do." Silence stretched between them, full and aching. In the days that followed, preparations changed. Abel doubled the camp's night watch. He spoke quietly with his men, and Rosalie saw how loyalty moved not with fear but respect. These men would fight beside him, if it came to that. One afternoon, Abel took Rosalie into the woods, away from the sounds of axes and shouted orders. They walked until the camp was only a hum behind them. He stopped near a stream, its water bright and cold. "I wanted to show you something," he said, pointing to a clearing where a sapling stood alone. "I planted that the year they passed," Abel said. "My daughter used to call it her wish tree. Thought if she whispered to it, the wind would carry her wishes up to the sky." Rosalie stepped closer, fingers brushing the small branches. "Did you wish too?" "Every day," he murmured. "Still do." She turned to him. "And now?" He looked at her, slow and searching. "Now I wish you'd see yourself the way we see you. Brave. Worth fighting for. Worth staying for." Rosalie's breath caught, a soft hitch in her throat. She reached out and touched his hand, rough, warm, steady. Their eyes met, and in that long, quiet moment, something shifted. Not a confession, not a kiss, but something perhaps more sacred, an understanding passed without words. When they returned to camp, the sky was bruised with twilight. Smoke curled from chimneys, and laughter drifted through the trees. But Rosalie's heart beat differently now, quieter, surer, heavier with something that felt a little like belonging. That night, just before sleep took her, she pulled the wedding dress from beneath the cot. She folded it with care and tied it with twine. In the morning, she would burn it. Not out of anger, but reverence, for the girl who'd worn it, and the woman who no longer needed it. But just as she set it aside, a sharp knock rattled the door. "Rosalie," Abel's voice called, taut and low. "You need to come." She opened the door, and the look on his face told her everything. "They're here," he said. "Nathaniel's men. Asking for you." Rosalie straightened, heart beating fast, not with fear but something deeper, resolve. She followed Abel out into the dark. The firelight from the center of camp flickered wildly, dancing shadows across the faces of the men gathering. Beyond them, 3 figures sat atop horses at the edge of the trees, torches in hand, arrogance burning in their posture. Rosalie stepped beside Abel, chin lifted, spine straight. The past had come for her. But this time, she wouldn't run. The torches flickered like devil's eyes at the forest's edge, 3 men atop sweating horses, their silhouettes sharp against the night. Nathaniel Stokes sat at the center, his black hat pulled low, jaw clenched and eyes narrowed, as if the world itself had offended him. Flanking him were hired guns, one lean, with a scar down his cheek, the other thick-necked and grinning like he already tasted blood. They made no move, not yet. They watched. Abel stood at the center of camp, his frame broad in the firelight, steady as the pines around them. His rifle rested across his chest, casual but clear. Rosalie stood beside him, unarmed, yet unshaking. Her fingers brushed against Abel's coat. Not clinging, just grounding herself. Nathaniel's voice cut through the quiet like a whip. "Rosalie Evans. You'll come now, and no more harm needs to be done." "I'm not yours," Rosalie called back, her voice steady, louder than she'd expected. "I never was." The scarred man chuckled. "She's got teeth now." Nathaniel leaned forward in his saddle. "You don't get to rewrite what's already decided." Abel took a step forward. "She's not going anywhere with the likes of you." Nathaniel's eyes slid over Abel like he was dirt. Who are you to interfere? I'm the man who gave her a place to stand. That's more than you ever did. The thick-necked gunman raised his rifle slightly, and in that breath, the camp shifted. From behind wagons and shadows, lumbermen appeared. No uniforms. No formation. Just axes, rifles, and the cold stare of men who'd faced blizzards and felled trees bigger than buildings. Jules had his carving knife tucked in one hand, Eli stood with his shotgun balanced across one shoulder, and even Red, with a coil of rope, looked ready to hang someone. Nathaniel hesitated. You'd start a war over this girl, he said, scoffing. She's not a prize, Abel said, calm but cold. And you already started it when you sent men to burn my camp. The torchlight crackled louder, as if in response. Nathaniel's face twisted. You'll regret this. He pulled hard on the reins and turned, riding back into the woods with his men. But there was no doubt in anyone's mind. He'd be back. And next time, with more. The camp held its breath until the torches vanished into black. Then the men exhaled, one by one. Abel looked around. We don't wait for him to bring the fight. We fortify. We move fast. For the next 2 days, blood and sweat were all they knew. Logs were hauled and stacked to form barricades around the heart of camp. Traps were laid, pits disguised beneath pine needles, tripwires strung with bells or broken glass. Rifles were cleaned, blades sharpened. The logging camp transformed into a fortress under pine. Rosalie worked among them, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, hammering boards beside Jules, dragging bundles of kindling with Eli, stitching together makeshift bandages in case they were needed. She never asked where she could help. She simply saw what needed doing and did it. Abel watched her with quiet reverence. Each day, her spirit showed more, her fire, her grit, the way she refused to shrink. She wasn't a runaway bride anymore. She was a woman claiming her place. On the third evening, she found Abel at the edge of the clearing, overlooking the trail that led to Dry Creek. He held a rifle across his lap and a flask in his hand. She sat beside him without a word. After a while, he passed the flask. She took a sip, coughed at the burn. I keep thinking, she said slowly, if I hadn't run, I'd be married to him now. Dressed in lace, lips stitched shut. Abel nodded, eyes fixed ahead. And now? He asked. Now I have blisters. And I sleep in a shed with spiders. And for the first time, I'm breathing. He looked at her, really looked. You don't owe us this fight. She met his eyes. Yes, I do. You didn't just give me shelter. You taught me I could be more than a name and address. I'm not going to run again. He didn't smile. Not quite. But something in his jaw loosened. She placed her hand on his. When this is over, if we're still standing, I want to stay. He turned his palm beneath hers and closed it, gentle but sure. They didn't say another word. The attack came the next night. It began with fire. Torches hurled from the trees, catching on dry thatch and tar-soaked wood. Flames licked the sky, and gunshots followed like thunder. Screams and orders rang out as the camp leapt into action. Rosalie woke to the smell of smoke and the crack of gunfire. She grabbed the bundle of bandages she'd prepared and ran. Chaos ruled. Men fought in the firelight, some shooting from behind logs, others swinging axes. Eli dropped one of Nathaniel's hired men with a shot clean through the chest. Red lassoed a raider from horseback and dragged him into the dirt, where Jules met him with his blade. In the center of it all stood Abel, shouting commands, reloading with practiced speed, eyes constantly scanning. Rosalie found wounded behind the barricades. Tommy, a boy no older than 17, with a gash across his arm. Mason, bleeding from his leg. She worked fast, hands shaking but steady, voice calm even when the bullets whined too close. Then she saw him, Nathaniel, riding through fire like a demon, eyes wild, rifle aimed at Abel. Without thinking, Rosalie ran. Abel fired at the same moment Nathaniel did. Bullets collided with the sound of splintering wood and flesh. Abel staggered, clutching his shoulder. Rosalie reached him just as Nathaniel dismounted, stomping toward them, eyes locked on Rosalie now. "You think you're brave," he hissed. "Think this life makes you worth something?" She didn't flinch. "I don't have to be worth anything to you." He raised the rifle. A crack rang out. Nathaniel froze, surprise blooming in his eyes as blood welled from his chest. Behind him stood Jules, smoke rising from the pistol in his hand. His fingers trembled, but his aim had been true. Nathaniel collapsed, face hitting the earth. The last of his men broke. They fled into the trees, vanishing like ghosts. Silence settled, broken only by the flickering flames and the ragged breathing of survivors. Rosalie knelt beside Abel, pressing a cloth to his shoulder. He winced but stayed upright. "You all right?" she asked, voice thin with worry. He nodded. "I've been worse." "You ran toward the gunfire, Rosalie." "I didn't think. I just saw you." "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." His hand found hers again. She leaned into him, forehead resting against his. Around them, the camp moved slowly, putting out fires, tending the hurt, gathering the dead. But the air had changed. They weren't just a group of men and one runaway bride anymore. They were a family. Bloodbound, fire-forged. By dawn, the flames were out and the barricades still stood. Rosalie sat beside Abel on the stump where they'd shared coffee days ago. His arm was in a sling, his shirt stained, but his eyes were clear. "You think it's over?" she asked softly. He nodded. "He won't come back. His name doesn't mean what it used to. Not after tonight." The pines rustled around them, gentle now. Morning light filtered through, casting golden beams like grace from the heavens. "Will you still stay?" Abel asked. Rosalie looked at the camp, blackened but standing, tired but alive. "I will," she said. "If you'll have me." He reached for her hand. "I already do." And there, in the quiet aftermath of blood and fire, with ash in their hair and new sun on their faces, they sat side by side. Two people who had nothing left to fear, because they'd already faced it together. Smoke curled lazily through the morning sky, not from fire, but from the blacksmith's forge deep in the heart of the rebuilt camp. The battle was 3 days behind them, yet the scent of ash still lingered like a memory refusing to be forgotten. Rosalie walked among the ruins and repairs, her boots scuffing over scorched dirt, her eyes tracing the silhouette of men hammering beams, stacking supplies, patching what was broken. They didn't rebuild fast because they were fearless. They rebuilt because they had chosen to live forward. Beside the forge stood Abel, arms still bound, face bruised, jaw firm. He gave quiet orders with the natural authority of someone not needing to shout to be heard. Rosalie stopped a few feet away and watched him. His presence anchored the entire camp, and yet something had shifted in him. There was still the weight of loss in his eyes, but now it lived beside something gentler. Hope. Jules passed Rosalie on his way to the tool shed, pausing only long enough to nod. She smiled, and he returned the expression, his quiet demeanor more open than it had ever been. It struck her how much the camp had changed, how the men carried themselves differently now. The fear that had clouded their eyes in the face of Nathaniel's threats had vanished. They were no longer waiting to be hunted. They had chosen their ground, chosen who they stood beside. Rosalie walked to the clearing just beyond the camp, where the trees thinned and the sunlight fell like gold across the moss. She stood beneath the sapling Abel had shown her before, the wish tree, he'd called it. Its branches reached a little higher now, bright green leaves trembling in the breeze. Rosalie placed her palm against its bark and whispered not a wish, but a vow. "I'm not leaving," she said softly. "Not now. Not ever." Behind her, Abel's voice came like steady wind through trees. "Then we build something worth staying for." She turned, and he stood with his arm still cradled in the sling, but his other hand extended toward her. She took it, and they walked back to the center of camp together. Preparations began not with blueprints or meetings, but with laughter. Red pulled out a bottle of whiskey that no one had seen since winter, and Eli fashioned a crude bench out of scrap wood and a barrel. The men, gruff and sore, found joy in hammering together a long table beneath the tall pines. Rosalie cooked beside the fire, stirring stew and humming tunes she'd nearly forgotten she knew. For once, It wasn't survival. It was celebration. That night, lanterns flickered in mason jars, casting soft light on faces grown weathered and proud. Abel stood slowly, wincing only slightly, and raised a cup. "To family," he said, voice quiet but carrying. The men echoed him, raising their own in return. Rosalie didn't drink, but she lifted her hand, fingers curled loosely around a ring. Not a wedding ring. Just a small band of carved wood jewels had slipped to her earlier that day, saying nothing as he placed it in her palm. "It's from the tree you stood beneath," he'd said. Rosalie had turned the ring over gently, the grooves smooth but strong. She wore it now, not as a bride bound to a name, but as a woman bound to her choice. After the feast, Rosalie and Abel wandered away from the firelight, out past the supply shed, and stood beside the half-burned wagon where they'd first met. It had been repaired now, the boards strengthened, the wheels trued. Abel rested his good hand on its frame. "You know," he said, eyes glinting with firelight and memory, "when you burst out of the trees that night, I thought you were some ghost in a wedding dress." Rosalie laughed softly. "I thought you were going to turn me in." "I thought about it," he teased. "But then you looked at me like you were running from the devil himself, and I knew I'd fight that devil before I'd let you go." She reached for his hand, the one that had reached for her in silence, the one that had never once tried to possess her. "Only protect. Only steady." They stood in silence until Abel spoke again, softer this time. "I've got nothing left to offer but a piece of land, a pair of tired hands, and a promise I won't break." "You already gave me the one thing I never had," she said. "A place where I don't have to pretend. A home." He leaned down, lips brushing her forehead, then her cheek. "Then stay," he whispered. "Not because you need to, but because you want to." "I do." A distant shout echoed from the edge of camp. "Ryder!" Eli's voice, sharp with alert but not panic. Abel's hand dropped from Rosalie's, and they hurried together to the front trail. A lone rider approached, weary and dust-covered, hat pulled low. As he slowed his horse, the men tensed, hands shifting near weapons, but Abel raised a hand. The rider dismounted, drawing a yellowed envelope from his coat. "Letter for Miss Rosalie Evans," he said. "From Dry Creek. Delivered through the postmaster." Rosalie stepped forward slowly, taking the letter with a hesitant hand. The handwriting was delicate, familiar. Her brow furrowed. She turned away slightly, opened the seal, and read, "Rosalie, if this reaches you, know that I have severed ties with your father. I did not know the depths of Nathaniel's cruelty. I was wrong to stay silent, and more wrong to accept his coin. Your mother would never forgive me if I allowed harm to come to you again. Whatever life you find beyond Dry Creek, I hope it's one of your own choosing. Forgive me, if you can. Aunt Edith." Rosalie stared at the page until the words blurred. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her coat. "Bad news?" Abel asked gently. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Just the last piece I needed to let go." He nodded once, and they walked back toward the camp, where laughter still rose like music through the pines. The next morning, Rosalie climbed onto a wagon filled with lumber, not to leave, but to ride beside Abel into the next phase of life. The road ahead wound through forest and into low hills where new cabins would be raised. Land Abel had claimed before the fever, a dream he'd left dormant in his grief. Now they'd build it together. As the wagon rumbled forward, Abel reached for her hand again. She laced her fingers with his, her wooden ring pressing into his palm. They didn't speak. The trees whispered above them, tall and watchful. Behind them, the camp continued, axes ringing, saws singing. Ahead of them, a future rose out of timber and trust. No more gowns sewn for obedience. No more paths chosen by men with power and no heart. She was no longer the girl in the white dress torn by thorns. She was the woman who'd survived fire and fear, who had stood beside men with hearts as strong as the forest, who had found her match not in gold or name but in a man forged like her, through loss, through love, through fight. A match forged in fire, and this time it would not break. Rose Clayton sat motionless in the dim attic room, shadows lingering across her pale face like whispers from ghosts. It was midwinter, and the chill had etched itself deeply into her bones, weaving icy threads through her veins. The silence around her was punctuated only by the cruel murmurs drifting from the floors below, the voices of Edgar and Martha Clayton, mocking, sharp, relentless. She pressed her palms into the rough fabric of her mourning dress, its once fine texture now reduced to frayed edges and faded dignity. The dress, a symbol of her grief, clung to her weakened body, embodying all that she'd lost. Outside, wind wailed mournfully, slipping through cracks in the wooden walls like unwanted visitors. A single candle burned low, its flickering light battling the oppressive darkness. Her imprisonment was a slow torment, as deliberate as Edgar Clayton's calculating mind. Since Daniel's death, her husband of scarcely a year, Rose had become a prisoner within her own home, a house that had once echoed with laughter and love. Now it groaned with resentment, its walls closing tighter each passing day. She shivered, wrapping her thin shawl tighter around slender shoulders. Her stomach ached with emptiness, days passing without proper meals, scraps tossed carelessly by Martha. Every cruelty inflicted upon her held the bitter taste of blame. They believed Daniel's death was her fault, that she had somehow poisoned his heart and his future. Daniel's fatal fall from horseback had given Edgar the excuse he needed to tighten his grip on Daniel's inheritance, the vast Clayton land now cruelly denied her. Rose rose carefully, her limbs stiff and aching, crossing the room in measured steps. The floorboards groaned beneath her weight. Her fingers brushed against the cold windowpane, the frost outside weaving patterns like delicate lace. Through blurred glass, she glimpsed the distant horizon, pale and infinite beneath heavy skies. How she yearned to be out there, far from these hateful confines. Her reverie shattered as footsteps thundered up the stairs, each step echoing with menace. The door rattled violently, then burst open. Martha Clayton stood silhouetted in the doorway, her narrow face twisted with contempt. "I told you to stay quiet," Martha hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes were as cold as winter ice, narrowed with spite. Rose met her gaze steadily, defiance stirring faintly within her heart. "I've made no sound." Martha stepped closer, her presence dominating the small room. "I heard you pacing. Remember your place, widow. Silence is your only protection now." Rose held her breath, unwilling to dignify Martha's cruelty with a reply. Her silence seemed to provoke Martha further, her sister-in-law's lips curling into a sneer. "You never belonged here," Martha continued venomously. "Daniel was a fool to marry a woman with no family, no fortune. You've brought ruin to our name." "He loved me," Rose whispered, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "And I loved him." Martha's eyes flashed dangerously, and without warning, her hand struck Rose's cheek sharply. Pain flared, hot tears blurring Rose's vision, but she refused to cry aloud, swallowing her pride. Martha glared once more, satisfaction twisting her mouth before she stormed from the room, locking the door with finality behind her. Alone again, Rose sank slowly onto the bed, her hand tenderly touching the stinging cheek. Her pulse beat furiously in her ears, humiliation mingling with growing rage. She knew now, clearer than ever, that she could not survive long here. The Claytons intended to destroy her. Days blended together, hours lost in monotony broken only by taunts and scarce nourishment. Rose began counting the passing hours by the fading candle. Hunger and despair became constant companions, yet within the emptiness blossomed a determination, a stubborn refusal to submit entirely. Late one evening, while lost in fevered dreams and memories of Daniel's gentle laughter, a sudden burst of noise erupted below. Gunshots split the quiet, accompanied by shouting and screams. Rose bolted upright, heart racing. Confusion swirled with panic as chaos spread rapidly beneath her. She pressed her ear to the door, straining desperately to make sense of the commotion. Voices rose and fell, some unfamiliar, thick with violence and urgency. Hope stirred tentatively. Perhaps help had arrived. Yet fear warned her this could be a greater danger. The heavy steps ascended once more, distinct from Martha's petty tread, heavier, purposeful. Rose scrambled backward, eyes locked fearfully on the rattling door. With a shuddering crash, it burst open, revealing a shadowy figure outlined by flickering torchlight from below. The stranger stepped forward cautiously, revealing a rugged face etched by hard living. His eyes, deep-set and piercing, studied her intently. He wore the dusty attire of an outlaw, worn boots, leather holster, revolver gleaming ominously. "You Rose Clayton?" His voice resonated low, surprisingly gentle beneath the gruff surface. She nodded warily, throat too dry to speak. "Name's Jesse Callahan. Friend to Daniel once, long ago." "No time to explain now," he whispered urgently. "Come with me." Rose hesitated, eyes wide with suspicion and uncertainty. Jesse noticed her reluctance, his gaze softening slightly. "Please. They'll kill us both if we wait." Decision flashed swiftly across her mind. Any risk was better than guaranteed death by lingering cruelty. She grabbed her shawl and followed him cautiously toward the staircase. Below, voices shouted alarms. Danger was everywhere. The journey through the house was harrowing, heart pounding fiercely as Jesse guided her swiftly through shadows, past bodies slumped lifelessly in rooms she'd once known as safe. She avoided looking at their faces, steeling herself from recognizing their identities. Reaching the cold night outside felt like breathing for the first time. Snow crunched underfoot, wind biting her exposed skin. Jesse hurriedly mounted a waiting horse, pulling Rose up behind him with practiced ease. Before she could fully grasp the reality of escape, they galloped away from the nightmare behind them, the house slowly vanishing into darkness. Miles passed in silence. Exhaustion threatened to claim Rose, but adrenaline kept her upright. Finally, Jesse stopped in a sheltered grove, concealed by tangled underbrush. The moonlit shadows danced softly around them. "You're safe now," Jesse assured quietly, breaking the tense silence. His voice resonated with sincerity, yet caution lingered in Rose's wary heart. "Why did you come?" Her voice trembled softly, still uncertain. "Daniel wrote me before he died," Jesse explained, his eyes distant with painful memory. "Feared something would happen. Asked me to watch over you. Took longer to find you than I'd hoped." Rose searched his face for deceit but found none. Instead, she saw echoes of Daniel's earnestness, the honesty she had once adored. Her grief surged anew, mingling gratitude with fresh sorrow. "Thank you," she murmured finally, allowing cautious trust to form. "Though you risked too much for a stranger." "Not a stranger," Jesse corrected gently. "Daniel's widow is no stranger to me. And everyone deserves kindness." His simple words warmed Rose more deeply than any fire could, touching a place inside she thought had died with Daniel. For the first time in months, tears of relief welled softly in her eyes. "I never expected kindness again," she whispered truthfully. Jesse nodded knowingly, his expression briefly haunted. "Life taught me cruel lessons early. But Daniel reminded me there's still good left in this harsh world." She looked up, catching his earnest gaze illuminated by starlight, sensing the heavy burdens he carried within his quiet presence. "Will they follow?" "Yes," Jesse admitted grimly. "Edgar Clayton won't rest until you're gone. But I won't abandon you." His pledge was fiercely quiet, filled with conviction and pain. Rose nodded solemnly, believing him implicitly. Though uncertainty lingered dangerously close, hope flickered gently between them, fragile but real. In that small moment, hidden beneath silent stars, Rose Clayton chose trust. Despite grief, danger, and relentless cruelty, she allowed herself to believe once more. It was a fragile promise, carried by two wounded souls into an unknown future. But for tonight, under a winter sky filled with cold, distant stars, hope was enough. The walls behind them would no longer whisper cruelty. Ahead lay uncertain paths and unseen dangers, but Rose knew one truth now clearly. Freedom, however perilous, was always worth fighting for. Rose awoke to the crackling of a small campfire, its faint warmth whispering over her weary skin. She stirred slowly, muscles aching from the perilous escape, eyes fluttering open to a morning painted in shades of muted gold and stark white snow. Nearby, Jesse Callahan crouched silently, stoking the embers with a broken branch. In daylight, his ruggedness was more pronounced, the lines etched by hardship deeper, the intensity of his dark eyes more vivid. He glanced up as if sensing her gaze, offering a nod that said more than words could. A quiet gratitude lingered in his look, mingled with caution. Rose realized then how little she knew of the outlaw who'd freed her from cruelty. Trusting him had been a desperate leap into the unknown, but instinctively, she knew it was the right choice. "We need to keep moving," Jesse murmured, his voice low and purposeful. "They'll track us." Rose nodded, pushing herself upright. Every inch of her body protested, yet resolve stirred strongly within her. She brushed snow from her tattered skirts and wrapped the shawl tightly, the thin fabric offering little protection against the biting chill. Jesse moved swiftly, stamping out the fire and saddling the horse. Rose watched him, impressed by the quiet efficiency born of a life spent eluding danger. His movements revealed a balance of strength and gentleness, hardened by necessity yet tempered by restraint. As he lifted her onto the saddle, their eyes met briefly, his gaze steady, hers guarded but grateful. Settled securely behind him, they set off again, riding silently beneath pale skies that stretched endlessly, indifferent to their plight. Hours passed in tense quietude, broken only by the rhythmic pounding of hooves and the whispering of harsh winds. The landscape gradually shifted into rugged hills, cloaked with dense forests and rocky ravines. Jesse navigated expertly, steering them deeper into remote territory, places untouched by civilization. Exhaustion began to cloud Rose's mind again. Yet each jolt of the horse reminded her of the reality she'd narrowly escaped. She clung tighter to Jesse, trusting his strength, sensing beneath the outlaw's hardened exterior a man deeply burdened by shadows she'd only begun to glimpse. At dusk, Jesse slowed their pace, guiding them to a hidden cavern nestled between towering boulders. Concealed by thick brush, it offered shelter from the brutal wind. Inside, the air felt warmer, almost comforting. Jesse helped Rose dismount gently, her numb limbs trembling with fatigue. They settled into the small cave, Jesse quickly making another cautious fire near the mouth. Rose observed him silently, noting how the flames flickered in his eyes, revealing depths of sorrow and memories he rarely allowed to surface. "Who was Daniel to you, Jesse?" Rose finally asked softly, breaking the heavy silence. Jesse paused, staring into the flames as though searching for answers hidden there. His voice, when it came, was roughened by pain. "Daniel was the only real friend I ever had. Back when we were kids, he was decent to me. Didn't matter I had no family or fortune. He saw good in folks others shunned." Rose's heart softened further toward him, touched by the raw vulnerability in his voice. "And you became an outlaw?" His mouth twisted bitterly. "Life doesn't always offer choices. One bad decision, then another. Soon, you're trapped on a path you never wanted." She sensed the heavy weight he carried. "Yet Daniel trusted you," she whispered gently, hoping to soothe the guilt lurking behind his carefully constructed facade. He nodded solemnly. "Maybe too much. I never deserved his friendship, but when his letter arrived, saying he feared for you, I knew this was my chance to do something right." Rose watched the flickering shadows dance across his rugged features, realizing Jesse Callahan was far more complex than his outlaw reputation suggested. A quiet courage radiated from him, tempered by profound regret. The peaceful moment shattered suddenly by the snapping of a twig outside. Jesse's posture immediately shifted, his hand gripping his revolver. Eyes narrowed, he motioned for Rose to remain silent. Fear quickened her pulse, her body frozen in tense anticipation. Outside, hushed voices drifted closer. Jesse pressed himself flat against the cave wall, weapon aimed steadily at the entrance. Rose held her breath, heart pounding furiously. A shadow darkened the mouth of their shelter. A bounty hunter's face appeared briefly before Jesse lunged forward, tackling the intruder to the ground with brutal force. Rose screamed instinctively as two more men surged into the cave. Gunshots exploded, the deafening echoes reverberating off stone walls. Chaos engulfed her senses. Jesse grappled fiercely, moving with lethal grace. Rose crawled desperately toward Jesse's fallen revolver, fingers trembling violently. Suddenly, Jesse cried out sharply, falling backward. Blood seeped ominously through his shirt. Panic surged through Rose, overwhelming every thought but survival. Her hands closed around the cold steel of Jesse's gun. Turning, she aimed shakily, praying for courage. "Stay away!" she shouted fiercely, voice shaking, eyes blazing. The men hesitated briefly, surprised by her defiance, buying Jessie precious moments. Gathering every ounce of her strength, Rose steadied her trembling hands and fired twice into the cave ceiling, the deafening blasts showering rocks and debris onto their attackers. Startled, they fled into the darkness. Silence followed, heavy and oppressive. Jessie lay motionless, breath ragged. Fear gripped Rose, stronger than before. She dropped the gun and crawled frantically to him, pressing trembling hands to his bloodied side. "Hold still," she whispered urgently, tearing fabric from her own skirt to staunch the bleeding. Jessie groaned faintly, eyes fluttering open. "You saved us," he murmured hoarsely, surprise and admiration mingling in his weakened voice. Rose's fingers brushed his forehead gently, her touch filled with desperate tenderness. "You saved me first. Don't leave me now." Determination hardened her voice, startling even herself. She wouldn't let him die, wouldn't lose another good man to senseless cruelty. Jessie's gaze locked onto hers, something unspoken passing deeply between them, forging an unbreakable bond. She worked tirelessly, driven by newfound strength, tending his wounds with careful hands. Jessie drifted between fevered dreams and lucid awareness, murmuring softly, haunted by specters from his past. Rose listened quietly, glimpsing fragments of a man shaped by relentless hardship, betrayal, and loneliness. By dawn, Jessie had stabilized, though dangerously weak. Rose sat exhausted beside him, watching the rising sun cast golden warmth upon rugged hillsides. Her hands trembled slightly from fatigue, but her spirit felt oddly strengthened. Saving Jessie had awakened something powerful within her, a resilience born of hardship, blossoming into courage. As Jessie stirred awake again, his eyes found hers immediately. "Thank you," he whispered softly, vulnerability raw and profound. "Never expected to owe my life to another." Rose offered him a weary, gentle smile. "It's owed to no one, Jessie. Life, kindness, they're not debts to repay." His eyes softened, reflecting deep understanding. Quiet respect passed silently between them, a fragile intimacy forged through shared danger. "We can't stay here," Jessie warned, reality reclaiming his voice. "Clayton's men will return." Rose nodded soberly, resolve hardening her features. "Then we'll face them together." Surprise flickered briefly across Jessie's weary face before admiration replaced it entirely. "You're stronger than anyone knows, Rose Clayton." "So are you," she replied warmly, helping him sit upright. "Maybe it's time others saw the man you really are." For a brief moment, hope and peace hovered gently between them, rare and precious in its simplicity. Yet Rose knew their peace was fleeting. Edgar Clayton's cruelty wouldn't rest until he'd destroyed them both. Gathering their scarce belongings, Jessie painfully rose to his feet, leaning heavily on Rose. Together, they stepped back into the harsh wilderness, united against a world determined to break them. Yet, hidden within the icy wind and rugged hills lay an unspoken truth. Freedom's rough edge had carved out something far more powerful than mere survival. It had etched trust, respect, and the faint, precious beginning of something neither had expected to find. With quiet determination, they pressed onward, uncertain yet unafraid. Behind them lay darkness and cruelty, ahead stretched unknown dangers and trials. But now, for the first time, Rose and Jessie faced that uncertainty side by side, each understanding clearly that some bonds, forged through fire and pain, could never be broken. Freedom was harsh, uncertain, yet fiercely beautiful. They embraced it willingly, stepping forward into shadows and possibility, ready for whatever awaited on the horizon. Every step deeper into the wilderness seemed to pull Rose Clayton further from the life she had known. Beside her, Jesse Callahan walked slowly, his breathing shallow, his eyes dark with feverish pain. Rose guided him gently by the elbow, feeling the tension ripple through his muscles with each uneven step. The outlaw who'd rescued her was now relying entirely upon her strength, and the irony was not lost on her. The terrain grew rougher, marked by tangled underbrush and crumbling stones that threatened to send them tumbling downward at every misstep. Nightfall crept steadily toward them, shadows lengthening and merging with the forest's gloom. Jesse stumbled suddenly, his weight nearly dragging them both to the earth. "Stop," Rose murmured firmly, guiding him to a fallen log. "Rest here a moment." He complied reluctantly, sinking onto the log with a heavy sigh, beads of sweat tracing paths through the grime and dried blood on his face. Rose knelt beside him, touching his forehead carefully. Heat radiated alarmingly from his skin, betraying a worsening fever. Fear tightened her chest, but she masked it carefully behind determined eyes. "We can't keep going like this," she whispered softly, worry threading through her voice. Jesse looked up, struggling to maintain his composure. "They'll catch us if we stop." Rose shook her head firmly. "They'll catch us faster if you collapse." His jaw tightened stubbornly, but something about her quiet, unwavering courage softened his resistance. Finally, Jesse exhaled slowly, conceding. "There's an old homestead nearby, abandoned but sturdy. We can hold up there." "Good," she nodded briskly, feigning confidence stronger than she felt. "I'll get us there." With renewed purpose, Rose lifted Jesse's arm around her shoulders, carrying his weight as they moved onward. The silence between them stretched comfortably, an unspoken trust strengthening with every painful step. Jesse leaned more heavily upon her, surrendering pride for necessity. Rose felt his heartbeat against her, its irregular rhythm stirring a deeper worry she chose not to voice. They reached the dilapidated homestead at dusk, its wooden beams warped with age and neglect. A sense of quiet desolation lingered around it, yet to Rose, it felt welcoming, a refuge from the wilderness and Edgar Clayton's relentless pursuit. Inside, shadows danced across peeling walls, furniture long reduced to skeletal remains. Yet the stone hearth remained intact, promising warmth and sanctuary. Rose carefully lowered Jesse to the floor near the fireplace, quickly building a small fire. Flames flickered to life, illuminating his pale, strained features. His breath came raggedly, pain evident in every shallow gasp. "I'll care for you," she whispered, squeezing his trembling hand gently. "Rest." He nodded weakly, eyes fluttering closed in exhaustion. Through the night, Rose stayed vigilant, her gentle hands tirelessly soothing Jesse's fevered body, whispering soft reassurances whenever nightmares gripped him. She studied his face, tracing each scar and line etched by hardship. Beneath his rugged surface, she glimpsed vulnerability, a man burdened deeply by choices and regrets. As dawn painted the horizon softly, Jesse stirred, awareness returning slowly. His eyes opened, clarity shimmering weakly within their depths. "You stayed awake," he rasped gently, touched deeply by her exhausted appearance. Rose smiled faintly, eyes tender despite her own fatigue. "Someone had to." Gratitude filled Jesse's expression, mingling with newfound admiration. "You're stronger than I realized, Rose." "You're kinder than you let anyone see," she responded quietly, holding his gaze, her sincerity shining plainly. "You saved my life without knowing me. That isn't the action of a heartless outlaw." Jesse hesitated briefly before answering softly. "Maybe it's just the heart of someone tired of being alone." Rose's breath caught at his quiet confession, her heart moved profoundly by his vulnerability. She squeezed his hand again, wordlessly reassuring him he was not alone, not anymore. In the days that followed, Rose tended Jesse's wounds diligently, strength returning gradually to his weakened body. Their bond deepened steadily, nurtured by quiet conversations shared beside the hearth's comforting warmth. Jesse spoke of his past, the boy abandoned by society, the outlaw forged by desperation, and Rose listened intently, finding in his words echoes of her own pain, loneliness, and hope. One clear afternoon, Jesse stepped carefully into the clearing beyond the cabin, the sun's warmth invigorating his weakened muscles. Rose watched from the doorway, pride brightening her eyes. Her strength had returned his own. Their unity had healed more than just physical wounds. "Rose," Jesse called softly, motioning her to join him. "I want to teach you something." Intrigued, she approached cautiously, accepting the revolver he offered gently. "Learning to shoot might save your life someday," he explained quietly. "You have courage, but courage needs tools." Rose hesitated momentarily before gripping the weapon determinedly. Jesse stood behind her, guiding her stance carefully. His touch was patient, encouraging. Her heart quickened slightly, not merely from nervousness at handling the weapon but from his closeness, their growing intimacy undeniable. "Focus," Jesse instructed calmly, his voice low beside her ear. "Aim steadily and trust yourself." Rose exhaled slowly, steadying her trembling hands. She squeezed the trigger carefully, startled by the sudden, fierce recoil. The shot went wide, striking a distant tree harmlessly. Jesse chuckled softly, amusement warming his eyes. "You'll learn," he encouraged gently, stepping back slightly. Rose laughed quietly, embarrassed yet determined. She tried again, each attempt bringing improvement, confidence building slowly under Jesse's patient guidance. As the sun began to sink lower, a comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by occasional instructions and soft laughter. Eventually, Jesse's voice became thoughtful, reflective. "I've never wanted a life of violence," he admitted softly, gazing into the distance. "It found me early, and I never managed to escape. Daniel saw better in me, but I never believed him. Until now." Rose lowered the weapon, turning to face Jesse fully. "You don't have to remain trapped by your past. Daniel's faith in you was justified. You proved that when you came for me." He looked deeply into her earnest eyes, vulnerability mingling with hope. "Maybe redemption isn't just about making amends. Maybe it's also about having someone believe you're worth saving." Rose's heart ached tenderly, moved deeply by the sincerity in his words. "I believe in you, Jesse." He reached slowly, gently cupping her cheek, his touch tender and hesitant. Rose leaned softly into his palm, heart racing gently with the sweetness of the moment. Their gaze held silently, unspoken feelings shimmering between them. A distant sound abruptly shattered the fragile intimacy, hooves pounding rapidly toward them. Jesse tensed immediately, eyes flashing with alarm. "Clayton's men." He grabbed Rose's hand, leading her swiftly back toward the cabin. "We have to hide," he urged sharply, urgency vibrating through his voice. They hurried inside, extinguishing the fire hastily. Shadows swallowed them as the horses drew nearer, voices shouting angrily. Jesse drew Rose close, shielding her protectively, weapon poised silently toward the door. Edgar Clayton's voice rang coldly outside, chilling Rose deeply. "I know you're in there, widow. Come out now, and I'll spare your outlaw friend." Rose's breath quickened sharply, fear surging through her veins. Jesse met her gaze, fierce resolve etched clearly upon his face. "Stay hidden," he whispered urgently. "Whatever happens." Before she could protest, Jesse stepped defiantly from the shadows, standing boldly in the doorway. "Leave her alone, Edgar. Your quarrel's with me now." Clayton's laughter echoed cruelly. "I'll have both of you." Gunshots erupted violently, chaos consuming the stillness. Rose pressed herself tightly against the wall, heart pounding wildly. Jesse fought fiercely, firing expertly, bravery defining every movement. Rose knew she couldn't remain passive, her courage demanded action. She gripped her revolver tightly, stepping boldly from hiding. Edgar's cruel face twisted with surprise as she aimed steadily at him, her voice ringing firmly. "Leave or die, Edgar." His sneer wavered momentarily before darkening with hatred. "You're bluffing." Without hesitation, Rose fired deliberately past his shoulder, the bullet whistling sharply into a nearby tree. Edgar recoiled instinctively, genuine fear finally overtaking his arrogance. "Next time, I won't miss," Rose warned fiercely. Edgar hesitated briefly before signaling retreat, his men following reluctantly. Jesse moved swiftly to Rose's side, pride gleaming warmly in his eyes. "You're remarkable." She exhaled shakily, adrenaline fading slowly. "I won't lose someone else I care about." Her quiet confession lingered softly between them, its meaning clear. Jesse reached carefully for her hand, gratitude and respect brightening his gaze profoundly. Together, they stood resolutely against a world determined to destroy them, knowing clearly their fight wasn't over, but neither was their hope. The outlaw's heart and the widow's courage had become inseparable. Bound by hardship and forged in trust, they faced whatever darkness lay ahead, united, unbroken, unafraid. Rose stood at the cabin's threshold, heart still pounding from her confrontation with Edgar Clayton. The aftermath of gunfire hung thick in the night air, a lingering smoke tinged with bitter victory. Beside her, Jesse breathed heavily, his presence steadying despite wounds that throbbed anew. His face bore traces of blood and soot, etched by firelight, bravery glowing in every exhausted feature. Together, they watched Edgar and his men vanish into shadows, leaving behind only faint echoes of retreating hoofbeats. Rose's hand, still gripping Jesse's revolver, trembled slightly, adrenaline receding into weariness. Jesse gently eased the weapon from her fingers, voice quietly reassuring. "It's over for now," he murmured softly, though tension lingered beneath his comforting words. Rose shook her head slowly, eyes distant. "No, Jesse. Edgar Clayton won't let us rest, not until he's destroyed everything Daniel left me." Jesse's expression tightened, the reality of her words weighing heavily. "Then we'll stop him." Determination shone fiercely in Rose's eyes. "We must confront him directly, Jesse. We can't keep running." He studied her quietly, recognizing the resolute courage now fully awakened within her. Finally, Jesse nodded, accepting the battle ahead. "We'll do it together." The journey back to town began at dawn, Jesse riding cautiously, Rose beside him. They moved silently, each lost in their own thoughts yet bonded tightly by shared resolve. The familiar landscape drew closer, the Clayton homestead looming ominously in the distance. Rose's chest tightened, memories of cruelty still fresh and sharp. Yet she forced herself onward, fueled by righteous anger. Approaching quietly, they paused behind trees, watching as Edgar and his men gathered angrily near Rose's home, the home Daniel had built lovingly, now vulnerable and exposed. Their intentions were painfully clear, to erase Rose's claim forever. Edgar's voice carried sharply across the cold air. "Burn it. Leave nothing standing." Flames erupted violently, licking greedily at wooden walls, devouring years of memories in heartbeats. Rose gasped sharply, grief searing through her heart. Jesse's fingers tightened protectively around her wrist, anchoring her amid despair. "We must save the deed," Rose whispered urgently, desperation replacing sorrow. "Without it, I have no proof of ownership." Jesse nodded sharply, eyes narrowing. "I'll distract them. Find it quickly." Before she could argue, Jesse moved boldly from cover, gun firing into the air. Chaos erupted instantly. Edgar's men shouted furiously, bullets exchanging rapidly. Rose seized the moment, rushing desperately toward the burning house. Flames roared around her, heat blistering her skin, smoke choking her breath. Yet determination propelled her onward. Inside, the fire consumed furniture, ceilings collapsing dangerously. Rose ducked low, heart pounding furiously. Daniel's study lay ahead, where precious documents rested. She forced open the smoldering door, choking on smoke. The deed lay atop Daniel's desk, untouched yet perilously close to flames. Snatching it, Rose turned to escape, only to find Martha Clayton blocking her path, eyes wild with rage. "You won't escape again," Martha snarled bitterly, her face twisted with hatred. "Martha, let me go," Rose pleaded firmly, eyes watering from smoke. "This doesn't have to end in tragedy." "It ended in tragedy the day Daniel chose you," Martha hissed venomously, stepping closer, desperation burning in her eyes. Rose felt the heat intensify, flames crackling violently. She knew hesitation meant death. Gathering every ounce of strength, Rose lunged forward, pushing Martha aside firmly but gently, knocking her backward safely clear of flames. Martha fell, startled, anger replaced briefly by shocked confusion. Rose emerged coughing, staggering into Jesse's waiting embrace. Behind her, the house surrendered finally, collapsing in fiery defeat. Jesse held her tightly, relief flooding his gaze as she clutched the deed triumphantly. Edgar Clayton, witnessing Rose's escape, roared in furious frustration. His men faltered, sensing defeat. Jesse stepped forward boldly, voice ringing powerfully across the burning yard. "It's finished, Edgar," Jesse declared firmly. "Your cruelty ends here." Edgar sneered bitterly. "You can't prove anything." Martha, emerging soot-covered from the smoke, spoke suddenly, voice shaking. "He's lying. My father arranged Daniel's accident. I heard him plotting." Shock rippled through the gathered townsfolk who'd rushed to the scene, drawn by flames. Edgar turned sharply, betrayal flashing in his eyes. "Quiet, Martha." Rose stepped forward calmly, confronting Edgar with unwavering dignity. "You destroyed your son, Edgar. You tried to destroy me. But cruelty won't win. Not tonight, not ever." Town Sheriff Marcus Langley stepped through the crowd, pistol leveled at Edgar firmly. "You're finished, Edgar. Your cruelty ends tonight." Edgar hesitated, eyes narrowing dangerously before surrendering grudgingly, recognizing defeat. His men backed down cautiously, weapons lowered. The townsfolk murmured softly, respect dawning slowly in their wary eyes, directed toward Rose and Jesse. Jesse wavered suddenly, exhaustion overwhelming him, sinking slowly toward the ground. Rose caught him tenderly, cradling him against her, tears streaking her soot-covered face. "Hold on, Jesse," she whispered fiercely. "Stay with me." His breath shallow, Jesse smiled faintly, touching her cheek softly. "I won't leave you, Rose. You gave me something worth living for." Townswomen approached gently, helping Rose support Jesse toward Dr. Elias's clinic nearby. Hours passed in agonizing uncertainty, Rose pacing anxiously, fear and hope warring inside her. Finally, Elias emerged, offering a reassuring nod. "He'll recover, Rose," Elias confirmed kindly, squeezing her trembling hand gently. "You saved him." Relief surged powerfully through Rose's heart, tears of gratitude falling silently. She entered Jesse's room quietly, finding him awake, eyes softening immediately upon seeing her. "You stayed again," he whispered warmly, smiling despite pain. Rose moved swiftly to his side, clasping his hand firmly. "I'll always stay, Jesse." Days turned to weeks, winter yielding slowly to gentle spring. Rose stood proudly upon her land, the deed legally hers, justice finally delivered. Jesse, healing steadily, joined her quietly, eyes reflecting peace and belonging he'd never known. The townsfolk gradually warmed to Jesse, recognizing bravery beneath his outlaw reputation. Acceptance came slowly yet genuinely, transforming Jesse from outcast to trusted protector. Rose watched proudly as Jesse's shoulders straightened, dignity and worth restored. One quiet evening, beneath skies brushed gently with twilight's glow, Jesse guided Rose onto the newly rebuilt porch. They sat side by side, watching stars emerge slowly overhead. Rose leaned softly into Jesse, savoring newfound peace. "Never thought I'd find this," Jesse admitted gently, voice thoughtful and quiet. Rose squeezed his hand tenderly. "You deserve happiness, Jesse." Daniel believed it. "I believe it." Jesse turned toward her fully, eyes filled profoundly with quiet love. "Rose, you've given me redemption and purpose. But mostly, you gave me yourself, more than I could ever deserve." Rose smiled warmly, eyes shimmering gently with tears. "You've given me courage and strength, Jesse. Together, we've found hope." He nodded silently, understanding profoundly the depth of what they had forged through fire and trial. Jesse reached quietly into his pocket, removing a small gold band, worn yet beautiful in simplicity. "It belonged to my mother," he confessed softly, vulnerability shining tenderly. "Never thought I'd find someone worth giving it to." Rose's heart quickened gently, warmth flooding through her chest. Jesse took her hand tenderly, slipping the ring carefully onto her finger. "Marry me, Rose," Jesse asked softly, hope and quiet joy filling his words. "Build a life with me." Rose embraced him fiercely, voice trembling gently with emotion. "Yes, Jesse. Always yes." Their lips met tenderly beneath twilight skies, promises sealed gently with quiet, heartfelt truth. Together, they'd rewritten stories of pain into strength, cruelty into compassion, loneliness into unity. The townsfolk celebrated their quiet wedding warmly, embracing Jesse fully, recognizing Rose's courage. Justice had come slowly yet surely, rising proudly from ashes of cruelty, transforming bitterness into gentle hope. Time passed, peace deepening steadily. Rose often reflected quietly upon their journey, how pain